I walked into courtroom 2B, a fresh-faced attorney, ready to argue a petty theft case. I walked out a Supreme Court justice, having inadvertently ignited a constitutional crisis. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 2B always hummed with a particularly grating frequency, but today it felt like they were actively mocking me. I stood there, my freshly pressed but slightly too warm charcoal suit feeling like a straitjacket. My client, Mr. Henderson, sat beside me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a good man, a man wrongfully accused of a petty theft that the DA's office had inexplicably decided to make a federal case out of. And across the room, perched on his elevated throne like a pale, self-satisfied gargoyle, was Judge Harrison Fane. Judge Fane was everything wrong with the local judicial system. Old money, a legacy appointment, and a deeply ingrained casual arrogance that he hid poorly behind the pretense of stern impartiality. He'd been nothing but dismissive since we walked in. Every objection I raised was overruled with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. Every well-researched precedent I cited was met with a condescending sigh. "Counsel," Fane drawled, leaning back until his judicial robes nearly pooled onto the floor, his voice dripping with an oily sarcasm that made my teeth ache. "Are you quite finished attempting to dazzle the court with these academic citations? Perhaps you could focus on presenting something that actually pertains to the facts of this rather pedestrian case, Miss Davies. Or are we to assume your preparation time was better spent elsewhere?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My jaw tightened. I'd spent 3 straight weeks preparing for this arraignment. My research was meticulous, bordering on obsessive. I looked at Mr. Henderson, saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, and knew I couldn't let Fane's thinly veiled prejudice slide. He hadn't even bothered to learn my first name, always defaulting to the condescending Ms. Davies, spoken as if it were an insult. "Your Honor," I began, forcing my voice to remain steady, slow, and measured. The voice I used when I needed to sound unshakable. "With all due respect, my citations are directly relevant. They establish the clear pattern of selective enforcement that Mr. Henderson is currently facing, a pattern which, I might add, seems to be exacerbated in this very courtroom today." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Fane's eyes narrowed. He hated being called out, especially publicly. He straightened up, his face turning a shade of mottled crimson that clashed horribly with his powdered wig. "That counsel," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that still managed to carry, "is dangerously close to contempt. You are a young woman, fresh out of law school, perhaps, judging by your rather thin resume. You must learn your place. The bench does not take kindly to insubordination, particularly when it comes from those who have yet to earn the right to lecture me on jurisprudence. Now sit down, or I will hold you in contempt, and we will proceed without your input." The insult landed like a physical blow. Young woman. Fresh out of law school. The implication that my skill was based on my youth and, given the context of his previous behavior, my race. "I am 38 years old. I graduated top of my class from Yale Law, clerked for the 11th Circuit, and have been practicing federal defense for a decade. I've argued before appellate courts across the nation. But to him I was just a dark-skinned interruption in his comfortable, all-white world. I took a deep, silent breath, the kind you take before diving into freezing water. Mr. Henderson squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, a silent plea for me to back down, to keep us safe. "Your Honor," I said, my voice now low, resonant, and utterly devoid of the deference I had been attempting to project moments before. The tone wasn't challenging, it was simply factual. "I understand your concern regarding my relative place in this system. However, I must respectfully decline your invitation to sit down." Fane slammed his gavel. The sound echoed, sharp and final. "That's it. Contempt of court. Bailiff, do you—" "Before you proceed, Your Honor," I interrupted, my tone cutting through his anger like a scalpel, "I believe there are some procedural details regarding my standing in this court that you may have overlooked in your haste to dismiss my argument." Fane leaned forward, his eyes blazing with fury. "And what, precisely, could you possibly have that overrides the authority vested in this bench? I didn't move. I simply reached into my leather portfolio, smoothly extracting a single, perfectly sealed, thick cream-colored envelope embossed with an unfamiliar, yet undeniably official, seal. It wasn't my standard court filing. This was sealed personal correspondence. Your Honor, you remarked upon my youth, suggesting I am inexperienced and lack standing to lecture you, I continued, holding the envelope just high enough for him to see the seal. You seem to believe that my career progression has been unremarkable, perhaps even beneath your notice. I paused, letting the tension in the room build to an almost unbearable pitch. Every eye in the gallery was locked on that envelope. Mr. Henderson looked utterly bewildered. Therefore, I stated, my voice now carrying the weight of something truly ancient and powerful, I feel it is only fair that I clarify my current professional capacity before this court continues to issue rulings based on your mistaken and frankly offensive assumptions about my background. I looked directly at Judge Fane, my gaze steady, almost unnervingly calm. I didn't break the seal. I didn't need to. Your Honor, I said, finally using the name he preferred, but with a chilling formality that stripped it of all respect. I did not graduate from Yale simply to argue minor larceny cases. I took this pro bono assignment because I believe in due process, regardless of the client or the courtroom. I took one final, slow breath, and then I delivered the line that stole the air from the room. My primary assignment for the last 6 months has been with the Chambers of Justice Alistair Vance, which means, Judge Fane, that while you are presiding over this municipal court, I am technically his primary clerk, and in his absence, acting counsel. I let the title hang there for a beat. Then I tilted my head just slightly, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that conveyed immense authority. But far more pressingly, Judge Fane, I was confirmed by the Senate 3 weeks ago. I swore the oath last Monday. You may address me as Justice Davies. The silence that followed my declaration was so profound it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the sound of a massive mechanism grinding to an absolute terrified halt. Judge Fane, the man who moments ago had been ready to have me arrested, froze mid-sneer. His crimson flush drained away, leaving his face the color of stale parchment. His mouth opened, attempting to form the word contempt, or perhaps liar, but no sound emerged. He looked less like a venerable judge and more like a taxidermied owl caught in a sudden spotlight. The bailiff, a burly man named Frank, who had been hovering menacingly near the defense table, actually took an involuntary step backward, bumping awkwardly into the jury box rail. Across the room, the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Thompson, who had been smugly reviewing his notes, slowly lowered his head, staring intently at the table as if the wood grain held the answer to the apocalypse. Everyone knew Fane's history. Everyone knew his politics. And everyone knew that the Supreme Court confirmation process was anything but swift or quiet. For a new justice to be confirmed, sworn in, and still be handling a low-level, pro bono defense case in a local court, it was unheard of. It was absurd. And yet the seal on that cream-colored envelope was not one you could forge casually. It was the seal of the Supreme Court clerk's office, and it looked terrifyingly real under the harsh courtroom lights. I slowly placed the envelope on the defense table, letting the sound of heavy vellum hitting polished oak resonate through the quiet. Your Honor, I repeated, my voice softer now, almost conversational, but laced with an iron core that had been forged over years of fighting systemic unfairness. I do not believe I need to read the warrant for your immediate recusal, though I assure you I have it prepared and signed by the Chief Justice, should it become necessary. But since you seem disinclined to grant my motion for dismissal based on precedent, perhaps you would be more amenable to considering the interests of the judicial conference? Fane finally found his voice, but it cracked pitifully, scraping against the silence. This is a stunt. You are fabricating. Am I, Judge? I cut him off, cleanly, smoothly. I walked around the defense table, my heels clicking decisively on the marble floor as I approached the bench. I didn't climb the steps. I stopped directly at the railing that separated the court floor from the dais. I was eye level with him now, but he was still physically higher, a distinction he clung to desperately. The fact that I am sitting here today, Arguing for Mr. Henderson is not the headline, Judge. The headline is your behavior. The fact that you, a sitting federal judge, a judge who still retains seniority and the power of appointment, mind you, believed you could openly mock, belittle, and threaten a young black female attorney with contempt without any regard for the merits of her case, simply because you disagreed with her presentation, is the issue. I leaned in slightly, ensuring my words hit only him. You saw an easy target, Judge Fain. You saw someone who you thought would flinch, someone who would apologize and sit down when you commanded it. You saw someone whose professional success you could dismiss with a wave of your aging hand. And you were wrong. Fain's composure completely shattered. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by naked, sputtering fear. He glanced frantically toward the gallery, then back at me, his eyes wide with panic. Bailiff, call security. I demand. Security won't help you now, Harrison, I said, using his first name for the first time. The sound of it, pronounced by me, seemed to suck the remaining oxygen from the room. My next move was calculated. I didn't pull out my new Supreme Court badge, which was currently tucked deep into my innermost jacket pocket. Instead, I reached back into the portfolio and pulled out my phone, a standard, slightly older model, and pressed a single button. The moment I did, a calm, clear voice filled the courtroom, broadcast from my phone's speaker. It wasn't the voice of a judge. It was the smooth, practiced voice of a highly professional legal secretary. Good morning. This line is for Justice Davies's chambers. The justice is currently engaged in a mandated ethics review at the Municipal Courthouse, Room 2B. Please hold for connection. The recording looped once. The courtroom was paralyzed, waiting for the line to connect. Fain looked like he might vomit onto his immaculate robes. Your Honor, I said, leaning closer still, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried over the phone's speaker playing on the desk beside me. That call is not to my chambers. That call is to the Chief Justice's secure line. I activated a silent emergency recording and uplink 5 minutes ago, precisely when you suggested I was wasting the court's time. I stepped back, putting distance between us, allowing the reality of the situation to wash over him. The audio will clearly capture your contemptuous remarks, your attempted use of unilateral force, and your refusal to hear my motion, all while I was clearly stating my intent to file an immediate motion for your recusal based on documented bias. The phone recording clicked, signaling a connection. A new voice, deep, authoritative, and instantly recognizable to anyone in the legal field, cut through the speaker. Chambers of the Chief Justice, this is Margaret. Whom am I speaking with? Judge Fain's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of his bench, his knuckles white against the dark wood, mirroring Mr. Henderson's earlier gesture. He looked utterly defeated, like a statue whose foundation had just been dynamited. I looked directly into the phone's speaker, a subtle, almost sad smile touching my lips. Margaret, this is Justice Davies. I apologize for the interruption, but I require an immediate ruling on the filing of a notice of recusal for Judge Harrison Fain due to clear, documented, and witnessed judicial misconduct. I am currently presenting the evidence live, if you would care to listen. The Chief Justice's voice, now audible through the phone speaker, boomed clearly into the stunned silence of Courtroom 2B. Justice Davies, of course. Proceed. We are listening. Fain stared at me, his face a mask of horror, finally understanding the sheer, irreversible depth of the trap I had sprung. He opened his mouth to scream, to plead, to deny. But before a single syllable could escape his lips, the courtroom doors burst open, not with a bailiff, but with two grim-faced individuals in crisp, unmarked black suits, holding official-looking tablets. They didn't even glance at me. They walked straight toward the bench. Judge Harrison Fain, the taller of the two, asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. We are here from the Judicial Oversight Committee. You are required to step down immediately. Please surrender your gavel and escort passes. The two men from the Judicial Oversight Committee, JOC, moved with the practiced efficiency of people who understood that public spectacle was part of the protocol when dealing with a high-ranking official's downfall. They didn't shout. They didn't even look aggressive. Their quiet competence was far more devastating. Judge Fane made a strangled noise, a pathetic sound utterly divorced from the judicial gravitas he usually affected. He looked down at the JOC agents as if they were insects, but his authority, his shield, had evaporated the second the Chief Justice's voice had come through my phone. "This is an outrage. I demand counsel. You cannot—" Fane sputtered, reaching instinctively for his gavel, the symbol of his fleeting dominion. The taller agent, whose name tag read Agent Miller, stepped forward slightly, blocking Fane's reach with his body mass alone. "Judge Fane, your rights have been read to you. You are not under arrest, but you are suspended pending an immediate internal review. Effective now. Please cooperate." Fane looked utterly lost. He looked over at me, his eyes pleading, no longer hostile, just desperate. He saw not the young woman he'd mocked, but the unmovable force that had just executed his career in less than 10 minutes. He started to slide off the bench, his movements awkward, like a marionette whose strings had been suddenly slackened. Meanwhile, Mr. Henderson, sitting beside me, was utterly silent, his mouth agape. He hadn't moved a muscle since I named myself Justice Davies. He didn't understand the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. He only knew that the terrifying man looming over us was now being escorted out by federal agents. The smaller JOC agent, a woman with sharp eyes, walked around the side of the bench and picked up the gavel, placing it gently into a velvet-lined case the agent carried. The act was symbolic, final, and utterly humiliating. I maintained my position by the railing, watching the dismantling of the judge's authority. I felt no satisfaction, only the cold, heavy weight of the responsibility I had just stepped into. I knew this wouldn't be the last time someone underestimated me based on superficial metrics, but I had just set a very public precedent. As Fane was being led past my table, his head bowed. He looked at Mr. Henderson, then quickly flicked his eyes to me. He mouthed one word, a raw confession wrung from his ruined pride. "Why?" I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. The answer was in the fact that I was standing there, and he was leaving in disgrace. The JOC agents gently guided the former judge toward the main exit. As the courtroom doors swung shut behind them, the silence returned, thick and awkward. The prosecutor Thompson was still staring at the floor. The gallery patrons, mostly court staffers, a few curious citizens, and 2 weary bailiffs, looked as if they'd just witnessed an alien abduction. I turned back to the defense table, smoothed my jacket, and faced Mr. Henderson, whose face was still pale but was slowly regaining some color. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice now returning to its familiar professional cadence. "My apologies for the theatrics. That was necessary collateral damage." He blinked rapidly, shaking his head, trying to process the whirlwind. "Collateral damage? Ma'am, Justice Davies, what just happened? Are you really achy?" "Yes, Mr. Henderson, I am," I confirmed, offering him a brief, reassuring smile. "Now let's return to your matter. The DA's office has just lost its leverage, and frankly, I doubt Mr. Thompson has the stomach to pursue this federally, now that his presiding judge has been detained by oversight." I took the motion for dismissal from my portfolio, the one Fane had refused to look at, and slid it across the table to Thompson's now numb hand. "Mr. Thompson," I said, addressing the shell-shocked prosecutor, "I am filing this motion immediately, citing documented bias from the previous presiding officer, and I expect it to be granted by noon. If it is not," I paused, letting the implication settle, "I will then be filing a motion to have the entire case remanded to the Attorney General's office for review concerning prosecutorial misconduct, given the clear pattern of selective targeting that Judge Fane clearly endorsed." Thompson finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. He saw not the intimidated young lawyer, but the formidable power behind the quiet confidence. He swallowed hard. "Justice Davies, I will review the motion immediately. We will concede the dismissal, Your Honor. We concede." It was over. Mr. Henderson was safe. Justice, in the most dramatic fashion possible, had been served. I nodded curtly to Thompson. "Good. My clerk will be in touch regarding the sealing of this file. Mr. Henderson, you are free to go." Mr. Henderson stood up, relief washing over him so intensely it looked painful. He looked up at me, his eyes suddenly shining with deep gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." You already have, by trusting me with your case, I replied simply. I gathered my few papers, the tension finally beginning to seep out of my shoulders. I glanced at the empty bench, then at the clock on the wall. It was barely 10:15 a.m. My first official act as a Supreme Court justice, handled between my morning coffee and lunch. I walked toward the exit, anticipating the swarm of reporters I knew would be descending on the courthouse lobby within minutes, eager for the spectacular fall of Judge Fane. I pushed open the heavy oak doors leading to the main corridor, ready to face the press line I was already dreading. But the corridor wasn't filled with reporters. It was empty, except for one figure standing silently by the elevator bank. It was a man I hadn't seen since my swearing-in ceremony, Justice Alistair Vance, the senior justice who had mentored me for years. He wasn't supposed to be back in D.C. for another week. He was supposedly recovering from his recent surgery in Arizona. He was leaning heavily on a cane, looking tired, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, were fixed solely on me. He hadn't come to congratulate me. His face was grim. "Clara," he said, his voice low, utterly devoid of warmth. "You shouldn't have done that in open court. You know the rules about publicizing internal matters." I felt a cold dread twist in my stomach. Justice Vance, I had no choice. Fane was acting in clear bad faith. I had to establish standing immediately, or Mr. Henderson would have faced a biased ruling. Vance pushed himself off the wall, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. Fane was a necessary irritant, Clara, a sacrifice we needed him to make. He was corrupt, yes, but he was predictable. You just blew up the entire chessboard. He paused, his expression darkening with something I'd never seen directed at me before, suspicion mixed with profound disappointment. "The Oversight Committee, Clara. They don't move that fast without direct authorization from the Chief Justice himself. And you know why the Chief Justice needed Fane gone quietly this week? Because Fane was about to expose something far more damaging to the court's internal reputation than his petty racism. Something you just guaranteed will now be dragged through the headlines alongside your grand debut." Vance leaned in, his breath smelling faintly of antiseptic. "Tell me, Justice Davies, why did you really feel the need to pull the nuclear option this morning? Was it really for Mr. Henderson, or were you trying to prove something to me?" He tapped his cane sharply on the floor. "Because if you think you can unilaterally dismantle the power structures we've built, Clara, you are about to find out just how sharp those structures can cut back. I need to know exactly what you triggered with that phone call, because I have a feeling that by exposing Fane, you've just exposed us all to the one investigation we spent the last year successfully burying." The air between Justice Vance and me solidified, thick with unspoken accusations and the sudden, terrifying realization that my victory might have been a catastrophic miscalculation. The weight of my new robes suddenly felt unbearable. "Expose what, Justice Vance?" I managed, my voice barely a rasp. I was cleaning up a local mess. Fane was an embarrassment, and he was actively obstructing justice. If the Chief Justice authorized the JOC move, then he agrees with the necessity of the action, regardless of the method. Vance gave a short, humorless laugh that echoed oddly in the deserted hallway. "The Chief Justice authorizes maneuvers, Clara, not grandstanding. Fane was scheduled for a quiet, pre-retirement investigation next month. His corruption was minor. Embezzlement from the judge's pension fund. Nothing sensational. We needed him to resign quietly before the real story broke." He looked directly into my eyes, his gaze drilling through any remaining veneer of my composure. "The real story, Justice Davies, is the ongoing Securities and Exchange Commission inquiry into the infrastructure investments the court made through 3 specific holding companies. Fane wasn't just taking pension money. He was funneling information about the court's private portfolio to an outside broker, a broker who coincidentally happens to be the lead counsel for the pharmaceutical giant currently appealing their patent infringement case before us. My mind raced, connecting the dots Vance was drawing in stark, terrifying lines. If Fane was connected to the SEC probe, if he was feeding proprietary information about the pending case, that wasn't just judicial misconduct. That was potential market manipulation tied directly to the court's own finances. The Chief Justice needed Fane gone before the SEC issued subpoenas that could link his small-time graft to the larger systemic vulnerability, Vance explained, tapping his cane again. Your public spectacle this morning, broadcasting live to the Chief Justice's chambers, guaranteed that the SEC, the Department of Justice, and every major news outlet in the country now knows that Judge Fane was hauled out of his courtroom by federal agents today. They will immediately connect Fane's exit to the sealed SEC investigation. The very investigation the Chief Justice was trying to keep out of the public eye until we could isolate and contain the leak. He stepped back, spreading his hands in a gesture of final, resigned defeat. You didn't save Mr. Henderson, Clara. You just confirmed to every major investigative body in Washington that the Supreme Court is currently managing a massive, interconnected scandal involving insider trading and corrupt judges. You forced the Chief's hand and handed the media the narrative they've been dreaming of: Supreme Court corruption. The implications slammed into me. I hadn't just won a small battle. I might have initiated a constitutional crisis. My dedication to transparent justice had collided head-on with the harsh, pragmatic reality of institutional survival. So, what now? I asked, my voice steadying again, the fear now morphing into resolve. If I had broken the dam, I had to become the flood. If the story is breaking, we control the narrative, Justice Vance. We don't hide. We were slow to deal with Fane. We won't be slow now. Vance studied me for a long moment, a flicker of something, perhaps reluctant respect, crossing his features. You are either the most brilliant young jurist I have ever encountered, or the most disastrously reckless. I'm both, I admitted, pulling my phone back out. I ignored the dozens of incoming notifications flashing on the screen, the inevitable reporters already massing downstairs. I focused only on the secure line. If the Chief Justice is listening, I spoke clearly into the phone, my voice ringing with renewed authority, then let this be my formal response to the new crisis. I am immediately requesting the Chief Justice convene an emergency administrative session of the full court. We will not allow this to devolve into speculation and media-feeding frenzies. I looked at Vance, whose posture had straightened slightly, recognizing the shift in strategy. We will release a joint statement within the hour, I continued into the phone, dictating policy as if I'd been on the High Court for 20 years. The statement will confirm the immediate suspension of Judge Fane due to violations of the Judicial Code of Conduct and acknowledge the existence of an ongoing systemic review into judicial ethics and financial oversight. We will not comment on the SEC specifics, but we will state unequivocally that the court is initiating immediate, transparent internal remediation to address every single identified vulnerability. I switched the phone to speaker again. Margaret, please patch this statement through to the Chief Justice's office immediately. And Margaret, have my new chambers prepared. I need an office with a window facing east, and I need a full security detail assigned to my former clerk, Mr. Henderson, immediately. Effective immediately, this administration operates under the principle of radical transparency. We will clean this house from the inside out, starting now. The phone clicked as the line disconnected, the silence returning once more, but this time it felt different. It felt like the calm before a very necessary storm. Justice Vance finally nodded, a slow, weighty acknowledgement. Radical transparency, he murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It's a damn sight more honest than what Fane was practicing. He leaned heavily on his cane, the energy draining from him now that the immediate crisis had been redirected. Go home, Justice Davies. Get some rest. You've earned your seat, but the real fight starts tomorrow when the press asks about the holding companies. He turned to leave, pausing at the elevator. And Clara, welcome to the big leagues. Don't ever let them tell you what you can't do again. As the elevator doors closed on Justice Vance, I stood alone in the quiet hallway. I looked down at my phone. The press notifications were exploding, but beneath the noise, a single encrypted message from an unknown sender flashed on the screen. It was a single, time-stamped document attachment, labeled simply, Fane, Broker, Ledger.pdf. I hesitated for only a second, the promise of rest forgotten. I tapped the attachment open. The first line of the ledger scrolled into view on my screen, not mentioning Fane, but referencing a transfer of funds tied directly to the pharmaceutical giant's shell corporation. And the transfer was signed not by Fane, but by a name I recognized from the oral arguments list for next week, Justice Elias Thorne. My blood ran cold. Vance had lied. Or worse, he hadn't known the full depth of the rot. Fane was the pawn. The entire structure I thought I was saving might have been controlled by one of my own esteemed colleagues. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached, the satisfaction of the morning turning to ash in my mouth. The battle for Mr. Henderson was won, but the war for the soul of the Supreme Court had just escalated far beyond anything I could have possibly prepared for. And now I was holding the evidence that could bring down the entire institution.